This release of RSpec introduces a real-time library function. On the right here we have a Vega profile that has been calibrated and adjusted for instrument response. Now let's click on the new library function. Here on the left we see a list of all the Pickles reference library items that have been shipping with RSpec for some time. As I click on any of these for different star types, we can see on the right in the profile that its spectral graph is displayed. As I scroll the track bar here, we can see them live updated on the right, and we can scroll until we find a curve that approximately matches our red profile. Once you've found an approximate match, you then can identify the star type from the library name. Now, identifying star types this way is somewhat subjective. For example, I just identified Vega as an A7 star, but its real spectral type is type A0. Also notice that as I slide the spectral type slider here, the graph on the right is moving and slowly migrating to the right end of the spectrum. That would be the cooler red class stars. Also in this release, let's look in the README file under the Help menu for a moment. It documents a new document that's available. It's called the Spectroscopic Atlas for amateur astronomers, and you'll be able to download it from that link. This is really a valuable tool, and we encourage you to download it. Let's take a look at it here in a PDF file. Here we can see the title page, and as we scroll through, we can see that it's a guide to spectral classes with a lot of valuable text as well as images. I'm going to jump down to page 75 and rotate it so it's horizontal. Here's a typical page in the Atlas, and we can see a calibrated profile on the top as well as a synthesized spectrum on the bottom. This is a nice reference document in itself, and it would be great if we could take that synthesized spectrum and pull it into RSpec. It would help us learn how to use the program. So I'm going to use Microsoft's Snipping tool to capture a piece of the screen. Now we could be using any other tool, including Alt Print Screen or Camtasia. I'm simply going to surround the area that I want to clip. Now I don't have to save it to a file. Once I've got it on the clipboard, we'll go back to RSpec. And here in RSpec there's a new feature that allows us to right-click here and paste an image from the clipboard. There's that image that we just pasted. Now, of course, to see color, I've turned off the forced grayscale option. Now let's rotate it into place. So there on the right, we have our profile graph. Now we can compare that to the one in the Atlas and actually experiment. We can look at similarities between these lines and those, for example, and we can actually do a calibration and see how our calibration using his numbers compares when we do it in RSpec. This is a great learning tool. Now here's another example of how you might use this tool. Maybe you're surfing the web, and in this case, let's go to Christian's site. It's a great site. And here on this particular page, he's looking at the spectroscopy of planetary nebula. If we scroll down, here we can see his spectrum. Now once again, we could right-click and save this file to disk and then pull it into RSpec, but now with a snip tool or any capture tool, we can capture it. Now we'll go back into RSpec. Right-click as we saw before and paste the image. There once again we've got the image, and by referring back to the web page we can use his calibration numbers inside of RSpec to test our skill and how RSpec works. This is a great learning tool. One thing to remember is that it's best to use synthesized spectra from the web as opposed to a photographic spectra, which may not be linear and may not calibrate well in RSpec. Now here back in RSpec, let's go to the Video File tab and look at another change to the program. The program's currently playing K22 because that's the video I had last loaded, as always. Of course, the reason that over here we have this Vega title is because over here we typed in Vega for profile title. If I put a check mark here, RSpec will now label the graph with the file name from which it came. This can help you identify the data that you're working with. Now let's remove that check mark for a moment and show you another feature. If I right-click, I can enter any Greek characters that I want easily by just selecting them that way. This works on the title and also on labels. So for example, hydrogen alpha, I might abbreviate H and then the alpha Greek character. Here's another minor change to the software. Let's click over here on Reference and open Reference. We've reorganized the folders a little bit. You're free to use them any way you wish. But now the reference folder is for your personal references. And there's a new folder, Reference Library, that contains the professional references from the Pickles library that ship with the product. By segregating the professional references from your personal files, we think it'll make it easier for you to stay organized and find what you're looking for when you're opening files. Now let's look at the averaging function just for a moment, and we'll turn on a playback while I'm talking. One of the things that can confuse people is when you switch your video file to a different file or to a live camera, it can take several seconds for the display on the right to catch up because the averages are still being accumulated. So now, whenever you switch video source, we'll empty the stack of average frames so that the right side immediately displays your data coming in. Also, here under Open, when you're opening a video file, the software will now remember the folder from which you most recently opened a file, so there's no climbing around to find it. Up here under Open Profile, when you're opening a .dat raw data file, the software now properly displays the word angstroms here if appropriate, and does calculations properly, taking that into effect.